Welcome to Legacy Conversations, a channel where we preserve military memories and history.
This is going to be a two-parter, maybe even a three-parter, but for now we're looking at a two-parter. First part of it, Rudy's going to tell us all about his national service and the other military commitments he had after that. Interesting. I've never heard of this one before, so he has an interesting story coming here. And then the second part about what Rudy has been doing, if I'm right, for the last 30 years.
Hello everyone, just a short announcement, won't take much of your time. People have been asking me, how can you assist the channel? You know, we've been going on now almost 4 years. We've recorded almost 1,000 videos and we were fairly successful. We are close to 4 million views and we are very close to 1 million hours of being watched. So we've done a lot to boost the image of the SADF and the SAP. And we will carry on doing it for as long as possible. But we do need help. We do need you to support us in any way you can. Spread the word. Make good comments. Give it a thumbs up. And also, if you wish, join the Patreons. That's for $5 a month. Of course, if you want to make it $20 or $50, you're more than welcome. There's about 50 of you who's doing that right now, out of 100,000 a month who come here to look at the videos. And that really assists us because that, in the first place, makes us feel good. And secondly, it pays for our Zoom. And we can also use the money if we go on a field trip or if we need new equipment. That's the one way. The other way is you can support us by buying my books. The books I wrote, or the George M. James books, which are all very, very good books, and it's books which you would be interested in. If you like legacy, you're going to like those books. So we created a brand new channel on YouTube where we discuss only the books, and thus we're leaving the legacy channel alone just to do the military stuff and police stuff and your stories. I will leave the links for Patreon as well as the new YouTube channel. I'll leave it in for you in the description. Thank you. Let's get back to the video.
Rudy Rousseau, welcome to Legacy Conversations. Baie welkom. Baie dankie. Ek sien regtig uit hierna en soos Koos altyd sê, ek is opgewonde. I'm excited. Over to you, sir.
Fossie, thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of your channel and to tell the younger people more about what we did when we were young. Although we're not so young anymore, but it was a real experience. I just want to say I was in one maintenance unit in Kimberley. So when I left school in 1979, I grew up in Randfontein and I was in a technical school. But for many people that don't know this, when you reach standard 5 in South Africa, before you go to high school, there are some exams that you have to write. And that, what is the word? Decide, are you academically, okay to go to an academic school, or are you technical? So we had two schools in Randfontein. The one was Jan Viljoen Technical High School, and the other one was Riebeek High School. Now, Riebeek was academic and Jan Viljoen was technical. But for a youngster, finish primary school, who doesn't want to go to a high school where you will be able to shoot with a gun and you can, play a trumpet or a drum or a bugle? And that was the school for me. So when I went to Jan Viljoen Technical High School, it was many, many years ago, a wonderful experience because it was a technical school. So you could choose what trade you want to do, motor mechanic, electrical, fittering, turner, etc. But as you grow older and you think back now, when you do school cadets, there was a very well-known trumpet player, Eddie Calvert, that came to teach us, and we used to go on camps during the high school period to go and learn how to play a trumpet at Doornkop military base. But we never knew, what was the reason for doing cadet. And that was the forerunner for you, because you are going to do national service. So from standard 7, we had to fill in some forms. Your parents had to sign it. And then from there on, every year, you received your call-up papers. So I can remember my first call-up papers was to go to Middelburg, Transvaal, 3SI, the infantry department. But, staying at school till, matric, every year you got to apply for exemption. Then after matric, I grew up in the age of steam locomotives. So my granny stayed in Cradock in the Eastern Cape. And on holidays, we used to travel by train, which was a fascinating part of my life. My eldest brother, he was a steam locomotive driver. He started in Cradock when he was 16 years old as a cleaner, and then became a learner fireman, etc. So trains always fascinated me, and especially steam trains. So after I finished school, I wanted to become a train driver, and I joined the railway here in Johannesburg. So I was an assistant train driver on the electric locomotives. Steam locomotives was almost now part of the history. But also every year, working on the trains, etc., you have to apply for exemption. Those were key point, jobs at this stage, because you have goods trains, you have troop trains, you have food, you have live animals, etc. But for a youngster, weekends, remembering Springbok radio, and you want to go and enjoy yourselves on the weekend, there was no such time. You worked any time of the day on the railway. So after my third year, I decided I must venture and to do something else. So obvious, I received my call-up papers, and the call-up papers said it was 1 maintenance unit, Kimberley. I can remember we all assembled here in Johannesburg at the drill hall, where they, beforehand, they send you papers, how you have to get fit, what you need to take, to the army, Brasso, all sorts of stuff that can help you during your basic training. And then that night, I remember my folks coming to say goodbye here at Johannesburg Station, and off we went by train to Kimberley. You meet all sorts of young men wondering, what is going to happen. You hear about, the border war, etc., and you are afraid. You don't know what and where you're going to end up. And I remember when we arrived in Kimberley, the January intake, it was terribly, terribly hot. And outside, the old faithful Bedford waited for us. And then obvious, the lieutenant and the corporal came to fetch you. You then go to the Bedford, and off you go to the military base. And when you arrive there, they have some coffee and some tea and rusk and stuff ready, just to give you something to eat. And then they call it you klaar in. In other words, they get all your details, you sign documents, etc. Then you go to the quarterman's stores where you're going to get your uniforms, etc. And if you get something that will fit you properly, you are very lucky. It's either too small or too big. underpants, browns, your overall, your kit, etc. But it was a wonderful time. But before I went to one maintenance unit, I was a member of the Salvation Army, and I used to play trumpet in the Salvation Army. So when we arrived there, I heard the band playing, and I was very interested, to join the band. But obviously, you have to go and do your basic training. Basic training, we had an infantry corporal. And let me tell you, he was totally different than the one maintenance unit corporals. We have suffered. All the men have to work together, whether you like it or not. Inspection time, cleaning the toilets, cleaning the showers, your boots, your bed, how to make up a bed, etc. It was a wonderful experience. Obvious when you're so young, you don't want to be there, but I mean, it's a call-up paper. It's a duty for your country. So during basic trainings, it was very tough. Then you get selected. They call you in, one day, and they say, listen, we think you have the potential to do certain things in the army, either to become a driver or, going out as a medic, etc. So I was then called to go and do a course at Jan Kempdorp. Now, Jan Kempdorp was an ammo depot. There were bombs and, whatever you can think of about ammunition was at Jan Kempdorp. But the course I did in Jan Kempdorp was to, if there is an emergency and you have to set up a camp anywhere, what to do. So I was actually trained to go and set up a military camp. So a military camp exists of, firstly, food, medicine, tents, water, sanitation, all the basic stuff that you will experience during your military service. And that was a big part of my 2 years when I did national service. After that, I became a corporal, and then I had to go back to Kimberley, to one maintenance unit, to learn some more stuff during, the quartermasters, how they operate, where they get, the clothes from, where you order the food from, etc. But during that time, in 1984, there were two intakes, a January intake and a June intake. And the reason for that was so that there are military men on a regular basis in case of war. So in that November, I was called and said, listen, you got to go down to the border. There are some of the guys that are now finished with their 2 years, and you got to go and help out. So we left one maintenance unit in Kimberley, obvious by train to Pretoria. And when we arrived in Pretoria, we were then transported. Obvious, the clerical side and the permits or the documents for you now to go to the border is already there. So we went then from Pretoria Station down to Waterkloof Air Force Base. Now, that was an experience that I will remember until the day I die. I've never flown in an aeroplane. So now you are here at the Air Force Base and you see those big flossies. So after you arrive there and you gave your name, etc., they then take you down, to the plane. What fascinated me more was all the things that was in the rear of this massive aeroplane, this flossie. There were jeeps, there were whatever you could possibly put into a plane, it was in the rear of this plane. And obvious, you sit, your fellow men sit right in front of you, so you sit here. Then there's another guy sitting at the back of you, and a guy sitting there. Then I remember, you know, when that Flossie took off at Waterkloof Air Force Base, the immense power these machines have. And I can still clearly see out of my eye when we turned left over the Voortrekker Monument. The plane had small windows, and I could see the Voortrekker Monument going past it. So it's about a 4-hour flight from there to Mapacha. When we reached Mapacha, you know, because there was now full-on contact in Angola, the plane all of a sudden just took a hell of a dive. And obviously, you fly the height of the of the height of the trees there. So in case, you know, the plane is attacked, etc., that, you know, it won't be so easy for them, you know, to shoot down the plane. When we arrived at, I just want to go back, you know, to basic training. So I'm sure, you know, the men that did national service can remember during their basic training, when you had to go and do falcons. Now, falcons was something else. You had to wear one of these. Now, inside, for the younger generation that don't know this is the inner of the staaldak. This is all steel. So you used to train with this during your basic training. But then we used to call it a mosdop. Now, I can remember after 3 months, you get a weekend pass. So you have to be tip-top. Everything must be 100%. The beds must be in line, the shoes, your toothbrush, your toothpaste, etc. So our corporal, I don't know, maybe he played a trick on us. But in those days, when you clean your floor in the bungalow, you used to get a chemical called dry bright. Don't know if you remember dry bright. It gives the floor such a beautiful shine. So we put dry brights on our mosdops. So you can imagine now this whole squad now with these shining mosdops now marching all over the camp. And we had the commanding officer, his surname was Greef. Man, did he freaked out. He said, "But guys, are you mad? Who said you must do this?" I said, "But, you know, we want to go on a weekend pass." So you can imagine now all these mosdops shining wherever we went. But this is what the staaldak used to look like. So obviously you now get dressed on your browns with your full kit. And with me, so many men will remember this is a R1 rifle. So we trained with R1 rifles. Now, this is just a model. It's a fiberglass model. And let me tell you, if you don't have a girlfriend, this will now be your girlfriend. Wherever you go, you will have your rifle with you. And for me, till today, this was the best military rifle that was ever developed, you know, in South Africa, the R1 rifle. And many of you guys will remember when we did, you know, exercises, we used to, you know, you have to straighten your arms like this, and you have to turn it, and then you have to reverse it. So I will never forget, one day our corporal and the lieutenant came into the bungalow. This was now during basic training, and he said, "Yeah, who of you guys wants to go to Durban?" So this was just after inspection. Now, you know how long it takes for you to make that bed. You know, you've got to put shaving cream around it. You've got to iron it with your iron, etc. And obviously, we were very eager. Yes, who doesn't want to go to Durban? So he said, "Now, all of you guys, now get on your bed. We're going to Durban." And we thought, but why getting on your bed? So all of us were now sitting on our beds. And he said, "All right, start to row." So you can imagine rowing with your R1 rifle. Said, "All right, we're halfway. Okay, we don't want to go to Durban anymore. Let's go back to Kimberley." So you got to reverse. There were a lot of good times, you know, during your basic training. Obviously, it's what you made of it that helped a lot. So after basic training, most of the time you wear your browns. This was part of the step out, that if you go, maybe to church on a Sunday, you had to wear this. And then obviously your full jacket that you had to, that you worn when you go out on a weekend pass, etc. But most of the time, this was probably the most favorite part of your clothes, is your borshoed. And till today, wherever I go and I see a man wearing a borshoed, we used to told here at the back, you will see there's a stitch there, and they used to call that the virgin. So it was very important that you had to wear this borshoed with the virgin at the back. You will be sorry if you walked around in the camp and it wasn't that way. You would have known that, and you will never ever forget. So when I arrived at the border, obvious being one maintenance, now we were called the loggies. In other words, our duty was logistics. We had to see that there's enough food in the, obvious order it, that there's enough food in the camp, that there's enough medicine, clothes, whatever a basic operational camp will use. But we were also very alert. We had to foresee that there is diesel, in the camp. I wasn't much part of organizing or ordering, the ammunition for the camp. There were different sections that were part of it, because part of my training was, the logistics, food, medicine, whatever, a normal camp will use. That is the first time where I ever saw a rattle. Honestly, I was so surprised. I knew that the military service have army tanks, etc. But that wasn't part of our job. Part of our job was to see when the rattles or the cannons and stuff arrived, at the border, that there is diesel, whatever they need. And, to put it also in a place where if the military base are attacked, that it is not close to the military base. It's more of like outside the base to prevent, accidents, etc. That in itself was for me, an experience I will never ever forget. Before the Flossie, every time before the Flossie comes to land, they had two gunships, two Alouette helicopters, that flew to, just to observe. So in case there's any attack, that they are ready now to help and to see where, if possible, from where the firing is coming from. Going down to Katima Mulilo, it's about 20 kilometers. Before you go to the border, you hear so many stories. And you think when you get off the plane that the terrorists will now, standing behind a tree. And obviously, we were not allowed to have live ammo with your rifle on the plane. You were issued in the military base with the necessary, ammunition and stuff. What fascinated me the most is the tar road from Mapacha down to Katima Mulilo. And the reason for that is, obviously, they were planting a lot of landmines in that area. So having a tar road, you could very easily see, if there was people, doing something there that is not ordinary with the tar road, etc. So we used to do a lot of runs from Katima Mulilo to Mapacha and back. And obvious, all the Flossies that came in had different supplies. So it was our duty now to get the supplies from the military aircraft onto the trucks and then escorted to, to the necessary departments, on the border. I must also say, it was an experience I will never forget, the heat. I survived on mama pies and Coca-Cola. The food there was, it was so hot that I very seldom went to the Manasi, to go and have, supper. I always go to the, at the airport, where they had a little cafe there, and, buy some mama pies and cold drinks and chocolates, etc. But one thing that was also very important, and I see now they still have a terrible problem with malaria on the border now in 2025 as well. So each week, we had to stand a parade. And then the doctor came around with that little white tablet that they used to give you. And they make sure that you swallow it because it's terrible, bitter. But that was for your own safety. So that was just part of my life. And after I was there, November, December, January, just to make sure that when the new guys arrived in January, that they know how things work and where to go, whatever they need, and how to to order the supplies. So after that, I then went back to Kimberley, and I joined the band for a couple of months. That was a wonderful experience. I saw some videos of the terrible situation, the Pretoria Showgrounds, what it looks like nowadays. And I remember as a youngster looking at all those military bands parading there, the drill times that you had, participating in Kimberley, World War II, memory days, etc. Walking there with your shoes that shine so nice, your outfit, you are so proud, walking with your beret, playing your trumpet, and with looking out of your eye, the public standing next to the road, you feel so proud. You are really doing something, for your country. And that motivated, the music motivated so many of our troops. We were 3 companies in Kimberley. The one company was maintenance. Then you had a transport company. And then you had the guys that were not too fit. They had some medical problem. Maybe they could not see, or just something that you can use them in the stores or anywhere else, but they were not. We used to call it G1, K1. You go through the medical course, etc., and they declare you fit. You can do the training, etc., and then they can use you for more, important stuff than the other guys. We were 3,000 troops in that military base in Kimberley, and I was there about a year ago, and it deteriorated so much that it's just for our generation. I'm now 63 years old. It's so heartsore. It's like, is it possible? Can a place look like this when I remember doing your basic training there? I must also mention, when I did my course in Jan Kempdorp, we had a staff sergeant called Ramos. What a wonderful guy. He was, a real gentleman, but, you are there to be trained as a soldier. You are there to do your duty. And I must give thanks to him. He was a real gentleman. And obvious the day when you receive your corporalship, you feel so proud. You are not there to look down to your fellow, soldiers. You are there to help, because 2 years is a very, very long time out of your life. I must just mention, after, I finished I cleared out in December 1985. Just before that, my mother, she was on a train down to from Port Elizabeth down to Johannesburg, and there was a terrible train accident here close to Sasolburg, and her situation deteriorated so much. So in that January, I received my call up papers, to go and do camps. And there was a very kind, minister, a preacher in Doornfontein. So I went to see them, and during that time, they said, you can either do your 2 years in the South African Police Force, or you can do your 2 years in the South Africa, in the military force. So instead of doing my camps in the military force, I was then transferred, obvious going on a course, and I was on the reserve force of the South African Police Force, and I worked at 10111. That was the area of the flying squad of the South African Police Force. I have sent you those pictures. That also was a total different, experience. But, none of these, whether it is the military force or the police force, can function without strict discipline. It's not to say if you carry a gun, you can do what you want. You get into very difficult situations. And even, the guys that were under me, in the military times, you cannot say sorry if that bullet is out of your rifle. You have to be, like they say in English, you have to be cruel to be kind. I want to ask if there are any one maintenance troops to please contact me. It will be the first time now in 2025 that we are going to be represented at the memorial, wall at the Voortrekker Monument in Pretoria. I have started a WhatsApp group, and I thank the guys that are now part of it. So if you were a member of any of the maintenance group, there were maintenance, one maintenance unit till 18 maintenance unit all over South Africa. Please get hold of me. We want to organize a parade, and it will be a day to remember. Obviously, it will be videoed, and we're not getting any younger, so it will really be nice to meet one of you. To meet you guys. Fossi, I don't know if you need anything else, or if you want to ask a question.
Rudy, I want to thank you, and I want to reiterate, contact Rudy. I am going to scroll Rudy's telephone number and his email address below here. In the comments below will be Rudy's YouTube channel. As I said, Rudy is a YouTube star in his own right. He's got over 10,000 subscribers. He deals with very, very, very interesting material. He's got access to very interesting material. I'm going to say, ja, die oulike gesiggie, this cute little face has been on one of his videos before. I was actually shocked when I saw it. I knew of the existence. You go look for the 101 Battalion video on Rudy's channel. The links will be below. You go and look there, and you'll see yours truly as a pretty little young lad running around a helicopter. Yeah, I was a flight engineer in the SAF. I was a number of times at Mapacha as ground crew, and then in 81 and 82, and then later on to Alouette bush tours. So Rudy's chat about the place brings so many memories. Fantastic place. There was one specific thing that I wanted to say about that, but we're running out of time at this point in time. Remember, this is part one. Go, hit the pause button here, please, folk. Ja, druk die knoppie daar dat julle gou-gou vir julle gaan koffie maak of tee of 'n biertjie inskink, ja. And then you come back, and part two, Rudy is going to talk very, very interesting stuff about his channel, but what other activities? Very interesting stuff. Anybody, enige Afrikaner of Suid-Afrikaner wêreldwyd wat belangstel in die Afrikaner volk. We are recording this where there's a heightened focus on what's going on in South Africa. President Trump is stirring the pot, and others are helping him stir the pot. Elon Musk, as you know, is born in South Africa. So heightened focus on what's going on in South Africa, and Rudy plays an important key part. But I'm going to leave that to part 2 for Rudy to chat. Thank you so much for part 1. Baie dankie Rudy. Vir deel 1. Ons praat later weer.
Dankie Fossie.
Well, now I've got a smile on my face. Big time, big time. Rudy, gaan ons oorlog toe.
I'm ready for the Anglo-Boer War.
You tell us all about that, please, sir.
Fossie, thank you so much. Again, just to elaborate on doing national service. I don't know a lot about guns, but this is a Martini Henry, and this was used during the Anglo-Boer War. And I've just finished a documentary about Dani Tron about a month ago. And this was the rifle Dani used. Now, in Kimberley, there were also a military base called the Dani Tron Regiment. And those were the guys that actually, before an attack took place on a certain military base, they had to go there and to see what the situation are, without being noticed. And then obviously bringing a report back before that military base is attacked. I've been doing Anglo-Boer War documentaries for the past 30 years. I was a radio DJ at Radio Pretoria, and I started to get involved, regarding the Boer heritage and things that we were never told about the Boer folk history, in South Africa. So part of my things that I do is I go and help and clean up concentration camp sites, Boer War memorials, doing Anglo-Boer War tours, whether it is in Natal in South Africa or going down to the Northern Cape, Kimberley, that area, to go and show people, where the battle actually took place and the reason for the battle. And obvious, the main thing is telling the truth of really what happened, in South Africa. So if people are coming to South Africa and they want to go on a tour, they're most welcome to contact me, whether it is a small group or schools or whatever the case may be. I can cater, for everybody. Before we had this conversation, I'm very proud to say that I can now do tours to Namibia as well. And Namibia also had a big history regarding, the battles that actually took place. One thing that are now a main issue is the Boer prophet called Siener van Rensburg. He was part of the Anglo-Boer War, and he never carried a rifle. He only carried his Bible during that time. So many of the Boer generals actually came to see him and ask, what do you see in future? One incident happened with General Delarey, who went to go and see Siener van Rensburg, and he was told, if you now go down to a place called Tweebos, which is in the Western Transvaal, there's a big British garrison on their way, towards Klerksdorp. And if you go there now and you wait for them, you are going to, shoot a lot of British, which actually happened at Tweebos. And month end, I'm going to do another documentary. But for the past 30 years, we were so misled regarding what actually happened during the Anglo-Boer War. During school also, I was never told about the concentration camps, which was a big history of part of the Boer folk in South Africa. And if I have to tell you now, there were 146 British concentration camps in South Africa. It's unbelievable, but there was 146 British concentration camps in South Africa. The Germans were never, the inventors of concentration camps. It was the British that, was the inventors, of the concentration camps. And all our years, we were told that there was only 26,000 Boer women and children killed during the Second Anglo-Boer War, which is totally untrue. I have in my possession a book with 34,000 Boer women and children with their names, their initials, the farm that they were apprehended, which concentration camp they were put into, the age of that person, and what was the cause of death. So I was very proud. It took me 7 years, obvious, with my wife, looking to see if we can find some of these places. And I did a 55-part documentary of 55 different women and children concentration camps in South Africa, of the 146 that there was in our country. I did a documentary about 2 years ago about the St. Helena Boer prisoners of war. Now, St. Helena is about 3,500 kilometers from Cape Town. And that to me was a highlight of, all the places I visited and filming, those places during the Anglo-Boer War. On the island, there were 6,000 Boer prisoners of war and over 700 boys under the age of 15 years. They have a huge cemetery in St. Helena. There's 180 prisoners of war that died in that camp. And let me tell you, I even get cold shivers if you stand there. And that was when the war started. The last time he actually greeted his wife and children, and he said, we have to go to war to fight for our freedom and die on an island, so far away. But there's a lot of things going on in South Africa regarding, cleaning up the places. A fellow friend of mine, Okkie, I forgot his surname now, he's in Vereniging. He also now goes around, and clean up these places of interest and doing tours to show people what actually happened, during the Anglo-Boer War. So I get on my YouTube channel, I've put a lot of documentaries there regarding the war, and I see the response of the people when they ask questions, but did it really happen? What was the cause, etc.? And it's so nice so that people in other countries now can really, hear the truth of, what happened and the atrocities the British did in South Africa when gold and diamonds were discovered here. In Kimberley also, there's a concentration camps. And my question always is, what was, the De Beers part of the atrocities that happened in Kimberley? Many people, when they go and visit, it's every time when I go there and I look at that huge hole there when diamonds were discovered, and I see that hole as part of the greed with the British when they heard that gold and diamonds are now in South Africa, and they came here and they landed ashore in Cape Town with 450,000 British troops against 60,000 Boers, on the field. And when you visit these battlefields and you walk there, it's something else that I cannot explain to people, the experience when you go there, whether it's in the morning or late in the afternoon. One place that fascinates a lot of people when I take them to Magersfontein, which is 30 kilometers just outside Kimberley. When you stand there and you think that if you look over the battlefield, 2,000 British soldiers were killed there in a 3-day period during December. So obvious, doing my basic training in Kimberley. As cold as Kimberley gets so hot in the summertime as well. And, you know, the trenches the Boers had there, British thought they were on top of the, you know, the koppie, the hill. And meantime, they had trenches, you know, standing right, you know, with their heads and looking at them and shooting them like anything else there. 126 Boers died there. One of General Delarey's sons also died in that battle, you know, of Magersfontein. Don't know if you have any questions.
When you were speaking about Sinner, now I've watched your videos, your documentaries about him. He's always been a folk legend, Afrikaanse legende onder die boerevolk. There's a story that goes crossing the Orange River or is it the Caledon River, where he warned the Boer general to take his men across in a specific point. When he did it, and when the Brits followed, it's like the sandbank just disappeared. Am I correct?
You are correct. That happened at Colenso in Natal, where the British were on their way to Spioenkop. Now, I'm sure a lot of, you know, British people that ever visited the battlefields in South Africa, that's one place they go and they see. A huge battle took place, and that's one part of the tours I do, you know, going down to Natal. Spioenkop is a fascinating place. If you listen to how the battle actually took place there, when the fog disappeared, it was like, you know, 2-3 meters. Then you see this British, you know, soldier right in front of you, and then you start to shoot. Siener van Rensburg, you know, said in his prophecies that in years to come, you know, that he will be in the news again. There's a very well-known Boer general. I see him as a traitor, Jan Smuts. And the reason why I see him is Jan Smuts went to go and visit Siener van Rensburg at Ottosdal. I do tours to Ottosdal as well. It was during the election time between the Natte and the Sappe. That were the two political parties. He went to go and see Siener van Rensburg, and he asked him, what do you think, what is going to happen to my party? Are we going to win? And Siener van Rensburg told him, no, you are not going to win. And the reason for that is, you fought with your own people during the Anglo-Boer War. And for some other unknown reason, and I say it's about money, you walked over to the British. And that is where the separation actually started between the Afrikaners and the Boers. Although we speak, that's a thing, you know, that we can maybe talk once some other time, the difference between Boers and Afrikaners. Although we speak the same language, and we like rugby and we like braaivleis, we're not the same. We don't think the same. So Siener van Rensburg had a friend called Boy Moosman. And Boyd stayed on a farm past Schweizer-Reinecke, which is also in the Western Transvaal. And he used to go on horseback 160 kilometers to Ottosdal to go and visit Siener. When he was visiting Siener, and Siener saw a vision, he actually wrote it down. So during that time, there was an Afrikaans newspaper called The Vaderland. And he used to send some of what Siener saw in the future. He used to send it to the newspaper, and he actually became very popular. Jan Smuts also knew, obviously been informed about Boy Moosman. And he sent Boy Moosman a letter to say, keep up the good work. But he sent his troops down to the farm of Boy Moosman to go and get hold of the books where the visions were written down. to get hold of it, because he now wanted to see what is going to happen in the future. So I am sure God said to Boy Moosman, trouble is on its way. Go and hide those books. So the books were hidden away somewhere, but not on his farm. When Jan Smith's troops arrived on his farm, obvious they dig up the soil, and I'm sure Boy Moosman was very happy because now he can plant potatoes. So Jan Smith, died, and obvious Boy Moosman had one child, Nelly. What is her surname? Her name was Nelly. So the books were handed over, to Nelly. I have to give credit. There's one person in South Africa, Andries Raad, that did a thorough investigation about the visions of Siener van Rensburg. I have learned a lot, from him. Although we don't see eye to eye, I have to give him credit of the work that he did regarding Siener van Rensburg. We also have another writer in South Africa. I don't want to know, to mention his name, because for me, it's not worth, to mention his name. The problem is, he also wrote a lot of things about Siener van Rensburg, but it's so untrue. He actually made Siener van Rensburg a Nostradamus for things that are now going to happen, which still now never happened. Some of the stuff that Siener van Rensburg saw is now happening in South Africa. He said that there will a time will come that the trains will stood still. And now at this moment, if you go down to Braamfontein, which is not far from us, since COVID, over 800 passenger coaches haven't been moved from that site. So that was part of the visions that Siener van Rensburg saw. And it came true. Those coaches are standing dead still. There's only 2 passenger trains running at the moment in South Africa, and that's the Blue Train and Raufoss Rail. So what Siener saw, what is going to happen, obvious with the political party which is now into power. I mean, I don't have to say to you, the chaos South Africa is in at the moment, all over, small towns, don't operate. The sewage places are, pumps are stolen. The roads is full of potholes. It's just a terrible state. And Siener saw this in his visions. What is going to happen in South Africa, in the future? And when I take tours down to Ottosdal, part of the tour is visiting his grave. Let me tell you, when you stand at his grave, you get cold shivers. To think that during the Anglo-Boer War, were 450,000 British soldiers roaming the country. How on earth don't you have a rifle with you to defend yourself, but only the Bible? The faith he had in God is just unbelievable. Not far from there, where he stayed, there's a place called Visioenkoppie, where, many times he went there and he sat, and all these visions came to him. He was sitting there one afternoon and he saw that there's a big thunderstorm coming to his area. And about a week after that, a terrible storm came, killed over 200 of his sheep and cows that was there in the land. So it is sad that so little people, know about the real truth of Siener van Rensburg. We now get a lot of, prophets in South Africa, but let me tell you, it's laughable. And what I cannot understand is people follow them. And then if it's not happening like they said it's going to happen, they think of another lie just to, to correct it. He was part of the Boer folk. I mean, if you look at General de Wet, where he fought the British, obviously we had traitors during the Anglo-Boer War. General Piet Joubert that surrendered at Paardekraal with 4,500, Boers. He did not wanted to listen to General De Wet to say, listen, but you have got to get away now from Roberts with his 10,000 British troops. But obvious now, it's an echo. I'm a general. You're a general. Why do you want to tell me? I know. There's a beautiful place here in the Free State called Clarence. There's a small place called Surrender Hill. I call it Verraaiers Koppie. During the Anglo-Boer War, there were a lawyer, Fanny Filonel, and a Boer commandant, Martinus Prinsloo. There were 3,500 Boers fighting the British between those mountains there. But slowly, not let the Boers know about this. They went to go and have a meeting with the British General Butler. And apparently, they were then given £8,000 to tell the Boers to surrender, with the message, if you surrender now, you can go back to your farms. You can carry on with your life, which was so untrue. Fossey, if you go there now, 125 years later, I will show you the spot. They took 3,500 of these Martini Henrys and Mausers with their ammo, and they have burned it right there on that spot. For 125 years, nothing grows on that spot. The terrible ordeal, because they were traitors. Those Boers had to walk from Surrender Hill to Tennyson Station, which is about 120 kilometers. From there, they were put onto open wagons, train wagons, to Bloemfontein. From Bloemfontein back to Kimberley, from Kimberley to Cape Town. From Cape Town, they had to walk another 30 kilometers to Simonstown. In Simonstown, there's a Boer cemetery. I doubted how many people know of this. When I did this documentary about St. Helena, this was part of the investigation. So there's also about 180 Boers that died in that prisoner of war camp. The other camp where the Boers were held were the Boers that surrendered at Paardeberg between Bloemfontein and Kimberley. So you can imagine the ordeal with those very dilapidated, flea-ridden, rat-ridden ships of the British. It took 2 weeks from Simonstown and from Cape Town to reach, St. Helena. What happened to those Boers that died on those ships? They weren't fridges to keep the bodies. They were thrown overboard. How many of the Boer folk died, had a grave in the sea? There's so many things that we haven't been told about the Anglo-Boer War. And this is what I do when I take people on a tour. If you ever visit South Africa, please get hold of me. It's a one-of-a-kind feeling when you go to these battlefields and you see for your own eye that what I am telling you, here's the truth, here's the graves. Those 7 years I did, regarding the concentration camps in South Africa, the 38,000 Boer women and children that died in these camps, it is terrible. I always say, and when I get into conversations and I tell people, if you have a question, ask me. If those 38,000 Boer women and children did not die in South Africa, it would have been a different story today. So many white people immigrated to other countries. But I'm a Boer. I did my part. When we did national service in this country, I never said, listen, I am not going to do it, because if you did not want to go and do your military service, you were locked up for 3 years. When we did national service, we fought for South Africa. Whoever lived in South Africa, whether it's a Zulu or a Xhosa or whatever the thing is. And now, we are not reckoned regarding, like a military veteran, which I am now at the moment. Why all these nonsense? I just, cannot understand it. If I take people down to Natal and they go and visit Blood River, what's fascinating about Blood River? Last year was my 13th year where I have been invited to go and speak about the truth, what happened at Blood River on the day of the vow. 68 years after the Battle of Blood River, the Battle of Isandlwana took place. 68 years. Now you can imagine the weapons, that were developed 68 years. The track boere used old Sanas, those long rifles. So 68 years, the British had new weaponry. And on that faithful afternoon, with their new weaponry, the Zulus killed over 2,000 British soldiers. Man, it's the land is riddled with battlefields in South Africa. If you go down to to the Natal area and you go to Vryheid had a concentration camp. If you go down to Eshowe, it had a concentration camp. If you go down to Cape Town, Sutherland is a small town. It's terrible cold. They reckon that's the coldest place in South Africa during the winter time. There was a concentration camp. How was it possible that Sutherland had a concentration camp? A very well-known place that the Transkaroo and the other trains used to stop was at Matjiesfontein. So at Matjiesfontein, there were over 10,000 British troops stationed at that place. So why will they leave that area and then go as far as Barberton in the Eastern Transvaal to go and get those women and put them in concentration camps? It's just amazing. Sometimes you get very informative people that go on a tour, and you always, learn about these battlefields. But Sina van Rensburg, a lot of these things are now coming in a realistic way, where everything is now falling apart in South Africa. What he saw and what the future, I say, when I did this 9-part documentary for Andries Raad, to be at his grave and to think what was written down, and you look at now, 30 years ago, what South Africa was like, the beautiful future that we had in this country are now riddled, with enormous troubles. And it's not like, it's going away overnight. It's too far, ahead. And that's the sad thing. Boer memorials are getting vandalized. I think in 10 years' time, nothing will be left, that you can say, I want to go and show you some gravesite. It's just been vandalized. And from my part, the last 30 years, I try, to go and clean it up. Obvious, I'm a military veteran. I get a small pension. So any donations from people that can help, I always take my camera and I show them the before and the after, so that people, they have to trust me. I mean, that money are used for diesel, for accommodation, for meals. Obviously, we don't sleep in a, hotel, etc. And then we go and clean it up. And then afterwards, I put that documentary onto my Rudy Rousseau YouTube channel, which they can see. So we try. But it's a sad affair, regarding some of these places. In Kimberley, most of the signs, if you want to go to a battlefield, are either stolen or so neglected that you cannot even see the writing on those signs anymore. So if people ever want to come and visit, obviously I know where the places is. I take them on a, on a tour to go and they relive the history of what happened, in South Africa. A fascinating place in South Africa is also Gold Reef City. I doubt it. A lot of people have ever gone, in a gold mine. And just to go and see and experience when gold were discovered here, what enormous problems they had to get the gold so deep out of the earth. And many people say President Paul Kruger, he's not for many people, he's not a hero. They think when the day when he left South Africa during the Anglo-Boer War, he took a lot of those Kruger rands with him to Switzerland. It might be true, because if you look at the economy of Switzerland, look at how rich those people are. So many of what belonged to the people of South Africa, has been taken away by the British. It's such a, it's a sad affair. If you go down to Kimberley as well, there's a few places that are really nice to go and visit, but there's also a few places that became so dilapidated that you just cannot go there anymore. And security, for me, taking tourists on a tour is most important. I don't do, things that might put their lives into jeopardy. I know South Africa. I know where to go. I know which routes, to take. So when you visit South Africa, Fossie, please give me a call, and then we'll take you some places.
I'm going to do more than give you a call. I want to come and walk some of those battlefields with you and record our discussions and our chats about it. I just want to point something out here about the women and children and elderly that died in the concentration camps. Many people think they were just white. No, people. Our black countrymen died there too. So
yes,
take your racism away. South Africa is not a racist establishment per se. They died together in those concentration camps. Rudy, I just feel I've been looking forward to this for so long. People, ask your questions below. We will get Rudy back, I promise you. Go to his channel, ask your questions there. I will put in, Rudy Rousseau. Just type in Rudy Rousseau, Rudie, not Rudi or Rudy, Rousseau, Roussseeaw. Have I got that right?
No, it's ROU.
Yes.
SSEAU. I've got the French surname.
Yeah. I've got a cousin by the name of Rousseau.
Rousseau.
Yeah, I still want to talk to him too, because there's a story for another day. Anyway, I thank you so much and thank your wife too for facilitating this meeting. People, ask your questions. Vra asseblief. Op Afrikaans of op Engels. We're doing this mostly in English for the simple reason that there's a vast international audience.
Yeah.
As Rudy has said, his YouTube channel, he's told me this, he doesn't get monetized because the content on his channel, like Legacy Conversations, we are not monetized. So anybody that can help, please.
Fossie, I just want to say, a lot of the Boer songs that we grew up with, we never knew that the theme of that song was written by somebody else overseas. And obviously, the words were now translated into Afrikaans. So sometimes when I make a documentary, I use some of that music because it's applicable to that part or that scene. And then I get, I'm very grateful for YouTube allowing, for me to put, these documentaries on. But now then I get a notification, there's copyright on it. I never knew. And I've asked them on many occasions, do you have the proper right of these people? Or are they just earning money to telling YouTube, no, it's their song? I must also say people can send me an email. I have a lot of documentaries on YouTube. Obvious DVDs are not part of our lives anymore, but I can send whatever they are looking for, straight to their emails via, what's it called, WeTransfer, etc. So whether you are in Russia or in America or all over the world, I can send it, to them. which they can then obvious watch in the comfort of their home. And if they have questions, they're most welcome to ask.
For sure. Rudy, thank you. I really, really enjoyed this. As I say, I've been looking forward to this for ages. We want to see you back, but we want you,
Yes.
Legacy Conversations folk out there, to support Rudy. Go to his channel, subscribe, help him that way. Please, folk, it's our history. It's South Africa's history. Rudy is doing exactly what Legacy Conversations does is to capture history. That's what it is. But Rudy has the advantage of being in South Africa and knowing the actual physical locations and sites. Rudy, soos ons altyd hierso sê, until we chat again, God bless.
Baie dankie, Fossie. Mooi bly. Totsiens.
Edited by Fossie. If you'd like to see what he gets up to in his spare time, do please visit his own little YouTube channel, Fossie at Treasure and Treats. Links included below. Your support would be highly appreciated. Help me grow my little channel. Thank you. Dankie. Inkos Kakulu. Bye.
Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and ring the bell to receive notifications.